Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe, follow us, likes, double tap.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We do a pod every week, opening up on Monday morning, giving you 3 short stories, 1 big story, and our wins and losses. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We haven't seen each other in a while due to the holidays.
Yeah, and I didn't even know what day it was today. I was late coming in for the podcast because I just got up and went about my merry way of preparing for the cold weather that's about to hit. And you texted and said, "Are you in California?"
Yes. I was like 20 minutes by myself, just sitting in the pod. And I was really debating, I was trying to think in that crisis, what do I do in this situation? Do I actually do a pod by myself and I really go off the rails? Because you kind of anchor, the yin and yang,
No, I literally have forgotten what day of the week it was multiple times in the last 2 weeks because the schedule has been so disrupted.
Yeah, and it's, this is the first time I left my house in 4 days. So who knows what this pod's going to be about today for all you beautiful people. But man, I think the last time I really left my house was for the 817 Gather, which that was really cool. 2 days before Christmas, people were hanging out with us.
Yeah, we had quite a good group show up, even though it was very close to everybody's kind of plans to go travel and all that.
And we got really productive talking about what we want to see from this podcast in the future. And I think that's really exciting to just get some really good input and just seeing regular people who just vibe and see that, there's another order in Fort Worth and a different way we could be going. And the fact that there's more people than just me and Ann who talk on this weekly just feels good that there's other people who get it and want to push us to be better. I think that was also fascinating as well.
Yeah, I think that you just described kind of the format that we've been sticking to pretty closely. And that is, the 3 short stories and the big story and kind of sharing the news. And we've heard from a lot of people that they rely on us to provide them with that information. They don't have to read all those publications, but it's helpful to them to get a summary of what we kind of thought were the top stories of the week or whatever. But one of the suggestions that came out of the last gather was kind of moving beyond just being reactive to the news and sharing stories that somebody else has already written and moving into the space of kind of encouraging folks to take action and do things in the community. And, that's something that literally, if I look back at every job I've ever had and every community engagement thing I've ever had, is what I've always encouraged people to do, because I think that people should be involved in their community and going to all the opportunities to give input and all of those things. So that just makes my heart happy. But I don't know if we're going to be able to get people to actually do that.
Yeah.
If they just want somebody else to do it, because sometimes that is the case.
No, yeah, I think, I'm excited. I have a bunch of crazy ideas in my head of how we take our 817 Gather group and community to expand it, to also just help us find stories, and so that we have more people sourcing information, which will enrich the podcast. Communication, I think, is always hard. Interviews, there is an interest in wanting more interviews and having more nuanced conversations with people. But something else that came over, it was kind of a conversation at the 817 Gather very lightly, but something that I realized more that holidays makes me realize is I don't know about you. I think you and I are on the same page here. But it's Fort Worth, for me as a new Fort Worthian, I have people in Fort Worth who text me Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'll forget to say hello because I'm in my other life, which is the not Fort Worth life, because, a lot of my friends don't even live in Texas, and a lot of the people I communicate with and work with on a regular basis doesn't even live in Texas. And so to me, I feel like I live 2 worlds. I live a Fort Worth local life, and then I live a, I guess global digital nomad life that's more on the regular day. And so today I was texting everyone back who texted me, Happy New Year, who lives in Fort Worth. And it made me think about is that a thing that is normal for Fort Worthians to have a Fort Worth life and then have an extra life for the things that Fort Worth can't give you outside of Fort Worth? I know you're similar because your kids don't live in Fort Worth now, but is that something you also had when you first resided in Fort Worth? How do you feel
when you first just started describing this, I kind of described it as a dip in, dip out. And so we were kind of titling this conversation dip in, dip out of Fort Worth. And I'm not new to Fort Worth. I've lived here, it'll be 35 years this coming up year. And when I first came here, I wasn't committed to staying here. I thought that I was going to get my husband to take the California bar and move myself right back where I came from.
And how long did it take for you to realize, okay, this is home now? Like that, stop wanting to do that.
It's funny because I don't know that I ever really had a moment where it was completely clear that that was never going to happen. Going back to visit my family and going back to see friends, I often thought about having a life there. But then by the time we'd put multiple years into building our life here and having our kids here and, raising our kids here and making friendships here, I was like, where would I go back there and be able to have everything that I have here? There was no place because my family's scattered up and down the whole state. So there wasn't one city that I could go back to and have everything that I had here. Like my friends, my kids' friends, parents that were then our friends. So you cannot create like your hometown in another place quickly. That's something that kind of builds up over time. I did go back and forth quite a bit, which is probably why my kids ended up going to college in California and then moving there, pretty much permanently from what I can tell. And now I'm entering into a phase of life where I am dipping out a little bit more than I did because my kids have been added to the equation of the people that are in another state. And so, and you were talking a little bit about the having friends across the whole country and being able to be friends with people that you don't see in person on a regular basis. And that's something that I think the younger generation is more in tune with. And it took me a minute to kind of even believe that you could have friends that you'd never met in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, we live in an era of society where your best friend lives furthest away from you. Like when you ask the average American, who's your best friend? And then what's the distance that friend is from your house? It is the furthest today than it has ever been. And so it's this dip in, dip out. Even we live with more affordable flights, right? This generation is getting on flights at an earlier age and at a more frequent pace than their grandparents did. And so the internet, right? So all this is, I've officiated 3 weddings, and my favorite person at a wedding is the groom's friend who play video games together and they never met in person until the wedding. So this guy was close enough to the groom to get an invitation to the wedding. So Fort Worth to me is and this is why, I remember talking to Visit Fort Worth and those guys about like coining Fort Worth as the best kind of digital nomad city. At the time I was saying like, because this was during the pandemic, we need to say, Fort Worth is the best work from home city because you can have affordable houses. You have the number 2 largest airport. So it's in the middle of the country. So you're only 3 hours both ways. It's truly the best dip in, dip out city that you could live in because you keep your local home base lifestyle low, and then you can spend the money going to concerts. I went to Vegas to hang out with where my best friend lives, and we went to the Sphere and went to a concert in the Sphere. So it's like, and then I came back to Fort Worth to do the podcast. And then live and, stay home for 5 days and do nothing. But it just makes me think about how many people in Fort Worth, like I imagine the Fort Worth, like originals, people who grow up here, lived here, parents lived here. Do they have that? Like to me, they have maybe like more of a tourism travel away to like go to Italy or go snowboarding, but I'm
truly go on vacation.
Yeah, they go on vacation, but I feel like there's new Fort Worthians who no, they go see their other communities and live their other actual living lives. They work in companies that are not in Fort Worth or DFW. They're online, they're in planes, and they have actual lives like you do in California. That is not you just going to be a tourist or going to, ski the Alps or whatever.
Yeah, it took me a minute to be going to California and then just settling into daily life with the people I was there to see. And not feel like I needed to do like vacation-y things where I was go, trying to see all the sights, do all the things, where I just sometimes spend the whole day hanging out with my mom and just talking and having conversations and going for a walk on the trail down by the creek that's near her house and hanging out in Sacramento with my kids and getting up and having coffee at the coffee shop and doing a little work. So it literally is kind of a dip in, dip out life there as well. And I don't think, to your point about do people who were born and raised here do that? I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but I don't see them doing that as much. I see them going on vacation, like you said, but not necessarily having kind of settling into a life other places. And I saw a lot of that when I was on council and I was going to other cities with National League of Cities, where they literally they have those across the whole country in various cities. So I went to Baltimore and Pittsburgh and all kinds of places I never would have maybe gone to visit. But they put on their best show, like show you what they're doing in their neighborhoods. And then those ideas were really kind of cool, fresh ideas that I thought we should bring back and talk about possibly doing in Fort Worth. So if you just sit in the city that you live in and you don't go do those kind of things where you see how other cities work and function, then I think you stagnate and you're not open to new ideas.
Well, I think there's also there is a privilege challenge because there's some people who have arrived here and don't have the funds to go back and see, their families or go back and see or reconnect with, that community they were in when they were working at another organization. And so I do also believe there's opportunity in Fort Worth to help people build community here who also it's just it's, you and I both don't have young kids we're taking care of. There's a lot of things that make dipping out easy for you and I.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to dip out because I have shared with a lot of people that I'm spending more time where my kids are, and I'm going to continue to do that because I really like my kids and they seem to like me. So it's very nice. They want to spend more time with us. And so that's a good thing. But it doesn't mean that I'm giving up on everything that I'm doing here in Fort Worth, because all that's really important to me too. And I want to make this place have all the cool things that I find in those other places.
Yeah. And I just think this goes back to I think cities and the local power that I feel like generations have made by building Fort Worth power, it's becoming less powerful because it is a player sport now. And the LeBron James or the player that plays on a team, wherever LeBron James goes, they're a competitive team. And I think these upcoming generations really understand that cities, you can be fluid within a city. The way we used to listen to a whole album, we now listen to one song from 100 artists rather than 4 CDs from the 4 same artists. And it's I think there's this constant transient malleableness that is here, and the cities that are able to cultivate but include those people who do like to have an anchor city like Fort Worth. And I just think I sometimes wonder, I ask my wife, do we really want to invest all this time and energy in living in Fort Worth? Because you and I can live anywhere. But like you said, my brother's an hour away. He has 2 kids. My dad and my mom are 2 hours away. So I'm here because they're here. But if they weren't here, where would I create? I think my new anchor position could be Las Vegas because my best friend lives there. We have a lot of business in Nevada. So it's I could have that anchor. It's an international airport. And so it's people's anchors really changed based on the connectedness of either their families or their closest ties.
And so for me, I don't think I could recreate what I've built for 35 years anywhere else. That's not possible. So for me, it would be giving up something that I've worked on for 35 years. And that is close to maybe someone who was born here and has built that over a lifetime of living here. So I think Fort Worth is definitely my anchor city.
But could you recraft that? You go to a ton of meetings and you invest in the community. You just take that playbook to wherever else you live. And then in about 12 months, all the people you thought mattered here now are different people in whatever city you decide to do the same playbook to.
I mean, I think it's the
It
same
would take
thing.
It would take you 20 months.
But I don't think that you can recreate a 20-plus year friendship. So I have a best friend here that I met when my children were toddlers who I could not recreate anywhere else.
Yeah.
That's impossible.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere without my husband.
Yeah,
Clearly, we've been married for
he wants to
35
stay in
years,
Fort
and
Worth.
he's kind of set up his retirement here.
Yeah.
But the
It's
friends
interesting.
thing,
You're being, and I'm not trying to make this, about age but like
No,
you
that's
have been in Fort Worth as long as I've been alive.
Well, I
so it's
know.
like, it is definitely a different.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah. So like, it makes me interested of understanding how will I feel. Because I'm most like, if I give myself a true percentage of doing the same thing you have of being in Fort Worth for 35 years, I think that's 70% likely because it's making sense. Me and my wife genuinely love our neighborhood. We love our community. Her parents live down the street. My I understand. I love the DFW airport. I grew up in Texas. It's making a lot of sense to stay here. So it'd be really hard for me to leave. I'm just wondering how much like real ties do I make to Fort Worth, because this is going to sound really bad. I just think there's not that many interesting people in Fort Worth. I'm just not interested. Like, it's kind of a snooze fest when I go and have a coffee with a person. I'm just like, and it's like, that's just the tough part for me.
I guess I run into a lot more interesting people than you do.
I know. And that's like,
I have a hard time finding enough time to meet people for coffee that I would like to spend more time with. And my New Year's resolution, if I'm making them, which I try not to, but is to be more intentional about trying to spend time with the people that I find really interesting here in Fort Worth.
yeah. And there is, and I think like there is interesting people I hang out with, but then we're all really busy because we're all trying to take over the world at the same time.
I think that is it.
Yeah,
We're really busy. So that's why
so
I've
it's
got to
like-
figure out times and ways to spend time together.
Yeah. And so, like, I think everyone at the 817 Gather, like, they were great. Like, I'm like, oh, great people who are moving and grooving. And these are, like, people who are, like, really moving and grooving. It was awesome. But anyways, obviously this was our short story. We realized that the 2 weeks off of our local newspaper, Fort Worth Report, has really been kind of making the same story, like reposting articles, and Star Telegram has done a lot about the Kay Granger legacy, which we'll talk a little bit about Kay Granger, but not necessarily those legacy pieces. So the dip in and dip out was just something we're like, is this normal? And, maybe I'd be interested to hear from some of you all when we see each other in the community. Like, is this a normal dip in, dip out? Like, do a lot of people have other worlds and realities and personalities and joys and communities they exist in that's not Fort Worth? I think it's something that I think it's going to be interesting as you said, as the millennials get older, the Gen Zers get older. How do they invest in their local
It's kind of that
cities?
shift, like with working too, where people used to work for the same company for their entire career and never make any changes and were very loyal. And now I think younger people are moving around a little bit more and finding different jobs and the opportunities to work in different ways.
Yeah,
all
they're not committed to
changed
jobs,
that.
they're committed to cities. What I
Yeah,
mean?
they may not be.
So it's interesting of how do you recruit and keep them. But let's go to move and short story. Speaking of cities and growing, short story number 2, Fort Worth overtakes Austin as Texas' 4th largest city. This is a Fort Worth Inc. story. As of January 1st, 2024, the city of Fort Worth increased population of 989,878, marking a significant 7.7 growth since the 2020 census. According to the Texas Demographic Center report, in a state where population growth is given, Fort Worth surges has outpaced many of its peers, solidifying its pace over Austin. Austin grew 2.6 over the same period. Their population is 986,928, so about 2,800 to 3,000 less than Fort Worth. I'm actually surprised this came out so fast, but also I feel like it's not shared a lot or hasn't been talked about enough.
Well, I mean, I think that the idea of Fort Worth growing has been a topic that is talked about constantly. And I think we're constantly saying we're growing, we're growing, we're growing, we're growing. So many 20,000 people a year are moving here. We're getting bigger. We're getting bigger. We're going to hit 1 million. So the story of growth has been front and center for years. This story coming out that we've moved up to the 4th largest and overtook Austin, I think I didn't see a whole bunch of other people taking up and writing a news story about it other than the Fort Worth Inc. magazine. But I did see a whole lot of sharing of this article on social media and a whole lot of hand-wringing and upsetness and saying stop and, people being upset about it. So to me, I think that the real story is, yeah, we're growing. A lot of people are moving here, but that's not all perfectly wonderful. And you don't get great benefits from growth without some intentionality put behind it. And I think that the hand wringing and the upsetness is because we haven't put as much intentionality behind how we grow. And we've talked about this topic a million times, alternative forms of transportation, multiple types of housing, infill, densening up our core, all the things that could make that growth not be having negative outcomes that make people wring their hands and harangue about how they don't want anybody else to move here.
So looking at the cities, and looking at the 2020 census compared to January 2024 estimates, the growth percent changes is really fascinating here. Houston was 0.6%, San Antonio 4.3%, Dallas 0.3%, Fort Worth 7.7%, Austin 2.6%. And when you look at the population, like just from those sound like small numbers, but Fort Worth in 2020 was 918,915 people. Austin was 961,000. So in 2020, they had over 40,000 more people than us just 4 years ago off this census. And so to now us pass them and us adding over 60,000 people and them adding only over this time from 25,000 people allows us to jump them. But I just think that growth is crazy. But then what's your take on the whole Dallas? I mean, 35 minutes from here, having the lowest percent population growth. Like if you're a city planner or a former city council member of Dallas, what are you saying about Dallas?
I think that Dallas has a whole lot more suburban cities around it with various things that attract people away from living in Dallas proper. So I think that's probably where the growth is going on that side of the Metroplex. Yeah. I think Fort Worth has a lot of suburban surrounding cities as well. But as this story says, its biggest opportunities, a sense of community and room to breathe. I think that people see the open space that's still available. Because we're so sprawly and spread out, you can buy a house in Fort Worth proper and still be in an area that, has a bigger lot size and all that. So I think that people who are looking for that can find that. People who want to be in the urban core can find that. So I think I've said this before, and I don't know if I've said it on the pod, that there are neighborhoods and places in Fort Worth that are similar to all the major cities in Texas. So if you're looking for kind of a San Antonio vibe, you can get that on the north side. If you're looking for an Austin vibe, you can get that on the south side, near south side. If you're looking for a Houston kind of Dallas vibe, big city core, you can find that in a downtown. And so I think that you can find the types of cities and the type of thing that is attractive to you in Fort Worth. So people come here for different reasons, which means a broader selection of people coming here.
Yeah, but I always like to. I love the people who study geography to say, like, right, 60% of Fort Worth's population is out of the loop. Right, we have some things that qualify as Fort Worth, which is the distance of Plano to Dallas.
Yeah,
but
it's
Plano.
crazy.
So a lot of the problem with this conversation, and we've said this multiple times, is Fort Worth is kind of like celebrating a game that they're rigged to win. Like when you look at, like, I need to chat GPT it because I don't even know the answer here. But what is when we look at the city limits, what cities are the largest cities by city limits? And what's that rank?
Oh, I think we're big.
Yeah.
We're up there.
So, that to me allows, still getting a lot of growth in your sprawl areas is impressive. And that goes back to, Alliance's very superpower. But then it also, we're dealing with those challenges of, to me, the problem with the statistic is because we have this anchor statistic, Fort Worth thinks it needs to change, or it really shows its flaws.
Absolutely does need to
yeah,
change.
and it doesn't see that. It doesn't see that Frisco is actually kicking its ass in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to admit that because wait, but we're the fourth largest city.
But not even to mention the fact that this whole room to breathe thing is not going to be the case anymore if we just let this growth happen unabated. Not to say we shouldn't have more people come, but if we just allow it to continue to sprawl out into our sprawly areas and continue to try to widen roads. And, you know, I'm going to say that again, and you're going to say again, oh God, here goes Ann again talking about the roads. That's just not sustainable. And all the things that are now making people maybe not want to move to Austin because of the congestion and all of that will happen here too if we don't have multimodal transportation and allow people to get around in other ways besides their cars. See, I'm gonna fit that in every damn pod. That's...
I know, but I also like we were talking about generations and how generations are changing their relationship to cities. Are people and residents just changing the way of what like cities should look like? Because I'm starting to see like Frisco 20 to 30 years right now will be a popular, strong national city. And Frisco will be what Austin is today in the sense of dominance, popularity, and power 20, 30 years from now. And what's going to be crazy is they'll have skylines and yeah, they'll have some type of density, of course, but it's just like the old model of building skylines and everyone having to be in a made core to work, to play, to do all these things now is being fronted with, you know, half the applications on LinkedIn for a job go to remote positions. Yet remote positions are only 15% of the jobs available on LinkedIn. So with this demand for working from home, demand for less people just wanting to drive, period, they're like, I'm not driving to work. I'm not driving anywhere. That we're staying in our houses more. The pandemic kind of accelerated that. Like there's this, my fear is like there's a lot of what Fort Worth becomes is this hollow downtown with a bunch of skyscrapers, but has a very glowing alliance, which is like a mini version of Frisco. And then you got the Frisco, which has Toyota, which has the Star, which has the big stadium, which has the soccer team. Soccer continues to grow. Soccer surpasses hockey and hell, basketball by now or whatever by this time. And Frisco, the repositioning of dominance is, you know, Frisco's actually even beats Dallas potentially. But it looks completely different than pre-internet, pre-style city compositions.
I think that what you're describing is a hellscape to me. Everyone being in their own homes, not going anywhere because they don't have to, and just working from home, ordering everything to be delivered, going through drive-thrus, that is a hellscape to me. And that is what is leading to something we touched on in our prep for this pod about kind of rising issues of mental health. I think lack of being around people and lack of community is a negative thing. I don't think that everybody should have to drive every day to their job the way we've done in the past. I think roads filled up and even public transportation filled up at peak hours in the morning and at night. That's something that can be shifted and done better and make life better for everyone, including their mental health and including to build community. But it takes intention. And if you just allow the growth to happen and avail yourself of the things that make life easier to just do out of your car, from your home, you're going to continue to exacerbate the negative things like mental health and healthiness and community. But if you're intentional and you look at the areas that have all of those things that make your life able to do that, like a neighborhood that has a grocery store within walking distance and a place to get hardware within walking distance and restaurants within walking distance or bicycle distance or whatever. And you still can avail yourself of a car, but you can get to a train that takes you to the airport. That can all happen in places like a downtown where they're adding residential and you can do those things. And even in your suburban areas, you can add the things that you want to have on a daily basis and not have to get into your car for everything. But if you allow that growth to happen in a way that is just stroads, which are high capacity trafficky roads that only kind of curtail to a car getting from this location to that location as fast as possible. You're not going to have those things, but you could redevelop old shopping centers in areas where development happened in a way that was very car centric, and that can be shifted and flipped.
Yeah,
So,
that's to me like it'd be really like I 100% am on team. I'm just saying like I'm looking at trends and like I'm just expecting like what's this worst case scenario looks like if it doesn't change.
which is why we're here to change it and bring light to how we change it so that we don't end up in
Because
the hellscape
it's like,
that is just the unintentional.
But it's
growth.
also like I'm learning I'm learning more how different I am or how I view how life should operate compared to the average American. And like I look at people who literally go to Buc-ee's, and I look at Buc-ee's, and Buc-ee's is an example of Frisco behavior. America loves suburban schools. You want to feel like a Buc-ee's? Going to a suburban school. It's like 4,000 kids at the school. And like we would rather send our kids to a 4,000 school that's grade A than a B school that has 700 kids in it. Because like we are obsessed with like popularity and like grabbing that, like just being in the most popular places. Like, and that just craves a thing that like I think like people aren't being conscious. Like they seek external consumer validation of what's important rather than being internally intentional what's important to them and saying, hey, you know, that's cute that you need to go to Coppell or wherever to go send your kid. I'm going to be okay with, you know, living a little bit more nuance that's more fitting for my well-being, which is like I care about distance from things I want to be at. It's just a distance like people, I don't know. I just think like people don't I don't know.
They don't factor in every single criteria of like wins and losses of the choices that they make.
And they don't know what they like. They look at what the market likes and say it's like, oh, well, if everyone's doing that, then that's what I need to go do.
I mean, if you drive around the suburbs in all of the Metroplex, you'll see neighborhoods with really big roofs sticking up above walls.
Oh, yeah.
Big roofs and walls. Yeah. Walls around neighborhoods, sometimes the sidewalk with a few trees around those neighborhoods, but big steep roofs and walls around them.
Yeah. And by the way, Fort Worth is the 14th largest city by square miles.
In the country?
Yes. But 1, 2, 3, 4 is Alaska. So those don't really count.
Alaska's
Jacksonville, Florida is number 5.
Which city in Alaska?
Sitka,
okay.
Juneau, Wrangell.
I think those are
Anchorage.
places. Those are places that you can't build.
Yeah, and then Jacksonville, which is like right under Fort Worth as the largest city. I think they're like 14 or 15 in the largest cities. And then you got Montana, Anaconda, Montana, Butte, Montana, other places that are just national resources. So if you take the ones that are just like nationally nice, then I'm gonna just take those off. That's 7 of the 14. So if I take those off, here's number 1. Number 1 is Jacksonville, Florida. Number 2, this is an interesting one, Oklahoma City, which is 620 square miles. To give you perspective, Fort Worth is 347.
That's wild.
Yes. Houston, Texas. So Houston, Texas is number 2. So I think if Fort Worth develops anyway, it's going to develop like Houston. Phoenix, Nashville, San Antonio, Los Angeles, Fort Worth, then Dallas. So, yeah. Not a lot of dense areas. I mean, LA, but even like LA could be so much better if they didn't let the car highway thing ruin their city. That place would be amazing. That could be said
for almost any city in any region in the United States of America.
But I think LA is a great example of how disconnected and disjointed an awesome city is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pockets of LA where you can have all the things that I find appealing. What you can't have is the, elbow room that Fort Worth still does tend to have. But again,
that is my country kid in me. I like elbow room.
Yeah, I know.
I went to Southside. Actually, that's the first time I left my house. Was like this Friday night. I went to like Nickel City and I found a parking spot on Friday night right in the front of Nickel City. I'm like, I love this. And I walked in. There was a seat at the bar. I'm like, I love this. And I'm like, where's everyone at? And I realized dry January really impacts our local economy. I'm glad I wasn't participating. But I was like, man, I was telling my wife, I was like, there's no one here. You want an espresso martini? She's like, yeah. You know, but is that bad for me to feel like I also think that's a problem? Like oh,
when
no
it's
one's
not
here.
crowded?
Yeah, it's like I want density, but I hate being around. Like it's like I'm a part of the problem in a way as well. So it's like that's where I'm like I'm afraid that is density. It's density the true. I think from a cost perspective, it makes a lot of sense. The denser we live, the better. But I don't know if that's like.
It's not like you have to be packed in elbow to elbow every aspect of your life. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that has all those things that I just described, and I can go on a walk and not run into anybody. I can be at my park across the street from my house and not see other people. There's nights when restaurants are fuller, and there's nights when restaurants are, less full. Yeah. And I don't go to Trader Joe's on Saturday. I mean, when people complain about the parking lots at Trader Joe's, I literally say to them, I don't want my Trader Joe's to have a Walmart parking lot that goes empty the majority of the time. Yeah. I'm totally fine with spreading my time to go out to a time that's not when the whole freaking world is going, which is the same thing I was talking about with not having like your job so prescribed that you have to have rush hour morning, rush hour night. These are the things that I think can make life better without having to have the negative things like acres and acres and acres of surface parking lots. Yeah.
Well, we will continue to see, because here's my thing about it. We may have passed Austin, but I was out and there was 4 people in the bar. So if we're really growing, just letting you guys know, it was pretty empty. So we're going to keep moving into short story number 3. Short story number 3 is Kay Granger. A lot of news came out about Kay Granger's legacy. She has done a lot in Fort Worth. There's also been news about her not actually showing up for votes since July, being the third most not representative in meetings to vote for her constituents. A right-wing Dallas media has made it a big story, went to her actual office, saw that her office was not there, found out that she was staying in a senior living facility, and her kids admit that the 81-year-old is having some memory challenges. So we wanted to bring this up because it's happened really right after the next day after you and I left. This is what people were talking about. But I think it's a bigger conversation we want to have. But someone who I believe may have a more connected relationship to Kay Granger, could you give at least some positives of seeing her impact on Fort Worth?
Well, absolutely. I mean, she was the first female mayor of Fort Worth, and she was the mayor when I first got here. I'm pretty sure at the dates I would have to go look up. I would say that she was a mayor that represented the whole city, and really, I had no idea what her politics were when she was the mayor of Fort Worth, and so I felt like she represented us well in that role. She went on to run for Congress, and that is a partisan seat. And my understanding from what I've heard from other people, and this is just, people talking, not that I went and did all the research about it, was that she was actually courted by both Republicans and Democrats to run for Congress.
Back in the good old days when we did that.
Yeah, when people worked together and had conversations. And so I think that she definitely has gone to be more politically conservative than I am personally. But in the time that I was serving as an elected official, I ran into her regularly at various events and meetings and things in Fort Worth. And she was always... she and her staff were always available to me. I think that there were some complaints about town hall meetings and access to just regular citizens, because clearly as a fellow elected official, I think we all run into each other a lot more than just a regular citizen in Fort Worth. And so I can totally see why some folks might feel like that's definitely a privilege of a fellow elected official. I think that to the broader story of how long people serve in public office, this is throwing no shade at the service that Kay Granger gave us in all of the various roles that she has had in our community and for our community. Because I think there's examples of this across the board, and we've had some high-profile examples of this in a presidential election recently about whether someone is too old to continue to serve. My point would be, is an elected role something that one should be doing for decades? If you look at many of our seats here locally, even, there is, people who've served for 30 years as a county commissioner. And I never saw elected offices as being careers that people should be doing for a lifetime. Because I think that you cease to be able to represent people when you don't have the lived experience of a broader, more diverse age group, racial group, all the different things. So I think having, running every 2 years as a city council member was very challenging, and trying to get things done on a 2-year cycle is hard. And so that's why when people say, oh, we should have term limits, and then there's things that go by seniority, that can be a challenge too, because if you have a city that has no term limits and a city that has term limits, then you have people who never make their way up into the leadership roles in certain parts of their job. But when you get to a point where you physically are unable to do that job, I think that becomes a challenge. And we've had several examples of that on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah, and I think that's, you're talking about, to me, number one in America that we should all be worked up is that, America's politicians are the oldest in the rich world. We have the farthest separation of the average age of the population and the age of our legislators. Our average age, in America is mid-30s, late 30s, right? 37, 38, where our average legislator is 59 and our presidents are around 80. And so you're looking at a big gap. And I mean, to give you it from a numbers perspective, from a percentage perspective, by group, 27% of United States legislators are 61 to 70. So that's one of every, four, over one of every four. Then another percent this is 15%. 15% of America's legislators are 71 to 80. 15%. And then we have a good 2.5% that are 80 or older.
I mean, I'm 58, and I have a hard time keeping up with the things that our legislators are needing to make decisions about, like this technology stuff. And I think that, and you watch some of these hearings, and they're clearly asking questions that make it pretty clear that they have no earthly idea what it is that they're impacting. Mm-hmm. And they're making decisions about technology and all of the things that are available to us, that I complain on the daily that my IT moved out of my house, and now I have to call them on the phone or send a text message that they sometimes don't respond to get an IT question answered. I also avail myself of YouTube videos, which can be very helpful as well. And maybe that's the answer for some of these older lawmakers. But I think the other answer is making sure that there are people who are willing to serve at all levels on a constant basis. I had a friend who used to always give me a hard time whenever I would be excited about not having an opponent for an election. And he would say, every elected official should have an opponent every time, which when you're running every 2 years, that you just want to punch that person in the face when they're a person who supports you in the job you're doing. But I do understand. I mean, when you then have a dearth of anybody willing to run, and somebody gets to be to a point where they're no longer effective, and then your choices are slim, that is where you see that there's a lacking in kind of making sure that there are people who are educated and informed and have that willing service attitude that they want to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Kay Granger has a legacy that, Fort Worth is where it is today because of a lot of what she's done. I mean, the military economy, she was a part of those committees that allow the Fort Worth to really build economic power in that space. I mean, Ross Perot Jr. calls her a legend.
Well, I mean, I was here when Carswell was going to get shut down, and we were house hunting at that time, and I had realtors showing me houses in the neighborhoods around what was then Carswell, and I was like, I don't want to buy a house in this neighborhood because the fact that those houses were so inexpensive was because there was a possibility that Carswell was no longer going to be.
You know, Panther Island, she was a part of. There's obviously, you know, I don't know enough about Kay Granger to give any nuances, good or bad, but I know there's also the nepotism that happened with the Panther Island stuff, with her son JD running, hiring family members, getting 6-figure salaries off of this Panther Island. There's also those things as well that's on her. You can argue the military-industrial complex. There's a lot of things that the progressives, the supporting of obviously police and things like that, and an array of other things that other people can see that Fort Worth is where it is. But I think you're talking about the conversation that I think is true. Like, I don't think people who talk about Biden's age gets a right out to not talk about Kay Granger's age, and in 2 years talk about Donald Trump's age. This is something that is in America. Like how do we sunset our leaders is the question. It's like, I think there needs to be a mentoring act of some society in our country. You see it in the Kay Granger stories and what Maddie Parker says, how much she mentored Maddie Parker. I mean, obviously, I look at old videos of Kay Granger and watch Maddie Parker today. I'm like, there was definitely there's a similarity here. And so I think, if you're going to continue to be of power after 70, you are required to, also elect, a younger politician you're going to mentor who is also going to have say in your seat, but you're ultimately allowing them to learn from you, but then also be get a public experience. There just needs to be some type of mentor act where I'd even be open to the more like mentoring and caring about young generations shows that that's good for our economy. So even if there is some like incentive, financially to invest in the younger generation to make it motivating to allow
to serve.
Yeah, like would the Kay Grangers and the other people, would they step down if they actually got, their salary, but instead of running, they were coaching the next person?
But I don't necessarily think whether you can't be guaranteed that the next person that you pick and mentor is going to be able to fill that seat, because it's up to us, the voters, to vote for people, which is why I think that we should all be educating, informing, and mentoring young people so that there's choices of people to serve in those roles and not just a hand the baton to the next person.
And there needs to be, and going, this also goes me to like going to age. There's this, and all these will be in the show notes, why people over the age of 55 are the new problem generation. This is a story in The Economist. And what it actually talks about is how one of every 4 American who is 60 or older lives by themselves. So think about this. You want to talk about housing. Think about how many houses that families could be living in. But there's a bunch of 6-year-olds by themselves living in.
I mean, to your point about there being houses that are filled with single occupants, kind of like cars, that are not available to growing families, that is definitely a thing, because people are not selling their houses as they get bigger. I mean, as they get older, and they're just sitting on multiple bedrooms that are not available to growing.
So there's like these, to me, this like these mentoring of the next is that like, This article talks about, I mean, there's more that this article talks about. It talks about how 55 to 64-year-olds are the highest growth of using cannabis, which cool beans, whatever, but they're the highest also of catching an STD, gonorrhea, syphilis. They're also the highest growing of getting incarcerated. So it's fascinating how, like, what does this demographic do if they're not in power, or if they're sitting at home by themselves, or they're what is this gap doing? Because this generation is also predominantly white or black, and the fastest growing populations are these like young Hispanic communities. I mean, if you look at who's saving the birth rate in America, it is Hispanic people. There needs to be some type of mentor relationship where if I'm a 60-year-old lawyer or politician or city council member or guy who ran a nonprofit or helps with the, with the local nonprofit down the street, who is the baton I'm going to be passed? And oftentimes that baton is going to be passed to someone who doesn't look like you, doesn't come from your socioeconomic status. And, how do you allow these next rising stars?
I think
And then build
there's so
community.
many examples of where that didn't happen and the person stayed in those roles for a long, long time. And then that next generation is now getting to the age where they're so much older. Yeah. So we've just like skipped right over that next generation. And
they show like, right, the average white American is 50 in their mid 50s. I mean, this was about a 2018 study that Pew did. So, but it was talking about how the average Hispanic American's 11. And the average Black American's 27.
But is this a problem of people having to work longer because they haven't saved and they don't have money for retirement? Or is it a situation where people are not retiring because they don't have kind of an idea of what they want to do next? And so because I mean, as
I
someone
also think
who's
it's a part of power, like power's addictive.
It's power and relevance.
Yeah.
Because literally, Jim is in the middle of retiring or cutting back, but he definitely is not busy. You know what I mean? He has a whole second career, there's a book he read called Second Mountain, which I haven't read yet, which talks all about what are your plans after you retire from the career that you had. Yeah. And if you don't have those kind of plans, then I could see how you could fall into this category of these people that you say are 55 to 60, whatever, who are causing problems because you haven't made plans of what to do with yourself.
This sounds way more exciting to be in legislation, though. I mean, these guys are having a good time.
And
having a good time.
Hopefully not getting sexually transmitted diseases.
Yeah, it was like, take your ideas, like take your history and just go have fun and, hang out at Margaritaville and get the next person going. I think America, that's going to, and I think like the answer to it right now is like what's happening is you're having the rich white capitalists who runs these tech companies, instead of asking for help from other humans who don't look like them, they're just going to build AI robots because that's how they're filling their labor force. So they're going to they rather live in their own houses with a bunch of robots than actually talk to people who don't look like them or sound like them. And so it's an interesting challenge that is there. But the other part of this Kay Granger story, which is why I didn't want to dive too much in like the judging of her legacy, is right when there's articles out where Beau French is saying this is bad and Kay Granger is not representing her people, and Dallas Examiner and all these right-wing media is attacking their own. I step back from this because to me, what they're trying to do is grab their Republicans who starting to feel like people aren't Republican enough and attack them. And I don't want to be a part of that conversation and creation because I don't want Republicans to think that because if I'm doing that here about Kay Granger, then whoever does listen that is a Republican, and if they do, I wonder why you listen, but then they go and decided to link up with these more extremes. And we have that extreme issue in this conversation with Kay Granger. But I also, my third part, honestly, like the bonus part here, is the Fort Worth Way just showed out for Kay Granger. Every person came out and wrote a beautiful post once this. I mean, it's crazy. When you mess with Fort Worth Way's own, it's crazy how they showed out. They did it when Jay Chapa happened. I'm like, whoa, y'all really have an agenda here. When every single person, every puff piece showed up. It's just incredible how we protect the aura of the influenced established. Like, to me, if I was 81, I don't think I would care that they found out. I'm like, yep, okay. But I don't think I would need people to talk nicely of me. Like, yeah, I'm old. I'm, whatever. Like, I just, it's amazing how, like, it feels like we're, like, trying to protect and save her legacy, which I don't think, like, this doesn't matter. I think this will be a finite memory in her, like, long career. Like, why are we reacting so aggressively? Like, I need to now post a picture with Kay Granger and be like, she was the greatest thing ever, and I would, we should be honoring her with flowers.
I
just
think what
it's-
people got upset about was just that this is dementia, and if there are memory issues, people have a certain reaction to that. And I think they felt like a need to defend. And I think because the original piece, like those folks went to where she's living now and tried to get answers. I found that really kind of gross. And so I even had kind of a defensive response because I just didn't feel like that was the right way to handle it. I don't think it colors what she's done or tarnishes her history. So I didn't feel the need to stand up and be like saying stuff about the positive things that she's done. I think that, to your point, I think this is a finite point where unfortunately people didn't know and somebody brought it to light in a really negative way from a position of the furthest right attacking people who are clearly right. And that's what I think people found really kind of gross.
Yeah. And I don't think it's like, that's another thing that I don't think it's gross, because when you choose to not be transparent and you choose to play with fire, aka not tell no one, and then not show up to work, and you're a public official and gross things happen to you, that's your fault for playing with fire.
Well, and I think
that's
that
how I look
we
at it.
shouldn't. I think that there's a.
It's like that's the whole thing with Jay Choppa. It's like, I feel like it's gross that we're like not allowing our own to be our own. Yeah, because y'all decided to play with fire and just sneak past this and do something that's not community. I mean, we just saw
not
Dallas.
Transparent and
We
all
just
of
saw
that.
how Dallas
I think being
City.
transparent, but I think when it comes to health issues, I think that people have a tendency to want to keep and that's wrong. I wish people could be forthcoming. I think when people struggle with health issues, when people struggle with mental health issues, we should be able to talk about those things. But I think because our society tends to not want to talk about those things, then people feel shame, and then they feel like they need to keep it to themselves. So I think as a society, if someone is struggling with these things, they shouldn't feel like they have to keep it a secret.
Well, yeah, I think ego and self-awareness is eventually the strategy for all of us needs to have the ability to sunset our legacy. She probably should have done it 3 years ago. Not just because she wasn't incompetent. It's just, to me, if I'm an investor of my legacy, I would rather get out early than try to play too long. And I think when you look at the greatest teams, when you look at the greatest organizations, the leader knows when to step out. And we need to quit giving our elders grace for being stubborn and ignorant because they can't let go of their ego. You didn't save your legacy to sunset correctly. And that is, I can't just be like, oh, but we got to respect our elders. Yeah, but they also got to be mature people who are in mature leadership positions and realize that they have to, the number one enemy to their success is their own, it's 6 inches. It's between their ears. And if you can't be critical and think about when it's time to stop, that is a thing we shouldn't let them not have responsibility to.
Yeah, I think you're right that you get into those roles and you often think, I'm the only one that can finish this. I'm the only one that can fix this. It's really important that I do this thing before I move on. And I think to the point of always having an idea of who your successor is going to be and thinking that that's the only person that can fill that role, or that you are the only one that can do certain things, that's the ego part of it. And I think there are many other people that could do these things, but you get into a role and then it's hard to kind of let that go. Yeah. And it kind of blows up your ego a little bit to be in those roles too.
Yeah, I read an AI book. It was called Genesis, and it was by Henry Kissinger. It was his last book he wrote before he passed away. My guy was 100 years old, right? Like and that's the kicker. There's a lot of knowledge and institutional knowledge. That's why there needs to be a mentoring act. I'm not a believer that Kay Granger shouldn't be on the federal tax dollar books and still helping, but like there needs to be a mentor act that allows these people, if you stop at 75, like I think the true number for me is like 75. Like I don't think 60 to 70 is fine. 70, 75 is cool, but 75 needs to be the number of I'm out at, but like that's a basic one, 75.
Well, I told you, like in France, when they were talking about raising the age of when people retire, people were rioting in the streets. Whereas here, we're inching that up all the time and basically forcing people to stay in those roles longer because they can't afford to retire. So, and it's hard to measure based on just a number for an age, because I know 100-year-olds that are in a bed, totally incapacitated, can't do anything, and 100-year-olds who are still driving and standing up at their birthday party, having full-on lucid conversations with the people who are there.
But I think that, but I think the challenge is enjoy it. Like 75, like everyone needs to have the equal number regardless. Like we just allow it to end. But anyways, obviously term limits, all these things are things we need to be having discussions. But let's go ahead and move into the big story.
So I had no idea when I sent you a podcast this morning that it would turn into the big story. But just this morning, I was listening to the Politics podcast, and they had Judge Tim O'Hare on, and the title of their pod was Judge Tim O'Hare, Not the Green-Eyed Monster Some Expected. So I sent this to you because I found it to be interesting, because I don't see him interviewed that often, and I often see news articles where he declines to speak to the press. And so when I first saw this, I was a little excited to see that he'd agreed to talk to some folks. I then listened to it. It's only about 27 minutes long, so it's not a huge lift for listening. And it kind of seemed to be a little bit more of a puff piece, an opportunity to allow him to toot his own horn and tell folks all the things that he has been doing. But I tried to go into it with an open mind, and he did indicate that they have cut $58 million from the budget without any layoffs during the first half of his 4-year term. And then they asked him some questions about like what his plans are for the next 2 years.
And I think why this is the big story of is Tim O'Hare a good person is because Politics, in my opinion, is like, I think there's someone who is really big. Like if we had to say the biggest political local Metroplex podcast,
I think they call themselves the biggest political podcast in the
No, that's
state?
Texas Take.
Oh, okay.
They do Texas Take, calls themselves that. But from a rating perspective, Politics has twice as more ratings than that one, because I keep in that tat on how close are we, but we're still relatively low, but that's okay. Politics has a ton of backing, WFFA maybe or Kara.
No, I
Kara
think it's
News.
NBC. It's like a big.
Yeah,
news.
I gotta find out who it is, but and the reporters are reporters who've been around for a while. But the real question here is like, there's other stories we have here. This isn't the only reason it's a big story. You also shared us another thing, but that Tim O'Hare is trying to do. But really, this is the startup for. Like, I think we're disappointed.
It is WFA.
It is WFA. So, I think we're disappointed in like the puff piece before you even dive into what he said. Like, I think before we dive into what he said, where we agree, where we disagree, is he a good person or not? Let's like. We are clear that we think Politics, and like, yes, Tim O'Hare did give them an interview, but you can tell it was controlled. It was a short interview. You can tell that it was all about throwing him softballs. He did say some powerful stuff, but let's be clear, like
there's been several podcasts that they have done where I'm like, where are the hard-hitting questions? It's not just this interview. I think they tend to not ask hard-hitting questions.
Yeah. And so anyways, like, go ahead though. What were some things you agreed with, or like you felt like was interesting, and what were some things that you thought were needed a little bit more?
So the one thing he did mention that they'd cut the budget and that they lowered the tax rate to the no new revenue. Both times they had the opportunity to do that, and they indicated that they had done that without firing anybody, no layoffs. But one thing I found interesting was that they mentioned that some of the jobs that they didn't fill were IT jobs. So they said there was a bunch of IT jobs that they had a hard time keeping filled, and that they would fill a few, but that there were always these IT jobs that were not filled. And so instead of trying to fill them, they just decided to eliminate them. And his comment was that they did that and that not one single person in Tarrant County complained about there not being enough people responding to IT issues. And I know personally, and I have heard much haranguing about the website for the Tarrant County Appraisal District. And I use that thing all the time. If I'm curious about a property, I go look it up on the TAD Appraisal District. And I look up the history, and there has been multiple times in the last several years where it has been completely unavailable. Like, I cannot look up properties the way I normally can look up properties. And there are people that I know who filed their taxes, and there was an extension on when you filed your taxes because their website was down. Yeah. So for him to say that they didn't fill a bunch of roles that they were struggling to fill in IT, and that not a single person complained, is just nonsense.
Yeah, and even just the regular county website is horrific. I mean, it's old school, and I would love to compare our county website to other innovative counties' websites.
Yeah, I use the election stuff for the website
and
as
it's
well.
So confusing.
Yeah.
And here's what's funny. He said there was no layoffs, but how did we not replace? But you didn't replace people, so it's like you kind of had
there were
layoffs.
no people in those roles.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to fire anybody.
But
they just didn't put anybody in those roles.
Yeah, and then when someone retired, we didn't fill the position.
We didn't fill that position.
So you're laying off by not refilling. Like, it's not laying off, but you're not.
I mean, if you do a whole, deep dive into efficiency and you find that things are not needed, then I think that's one thing. And I think being efficient, and if something got, added, and he did make some comments about that, that certain things had grown, criminal courts had grown from a department that didn't exist at all to a department that had, some higher number of people. And they felt like that was something that needed to be curtailed. I think if that's true, then show us what it is that, was added and what was beneficial about that and what is not going to be needed that you're removing. I don't think you should not try to deep dive and be efficient, but to just be like, we had a hard time hiring enough IT people to fill these roles, so therefore these roles must not be necessary. I mean, it's kind of like Fort Worth ISD with their whole layoffs in their IT department and then all these teachers having to figure out how to get laptops to their students with no IT support.
He did say some of his interesting quotes in here was, just in 2016 to 2020 alone, a study was done by a local group. That's what he said. He didn't have the audacity to give us real research references. Tarrant County's population plus inflation growth went up a little over 12%. Spending by the county went up over 44%. And guess what? That was just a study from 2016 to 2020. From 2020 to 2023, before I got into office, it was even a higher rate. So, again, I'm not saying that. I mean, there's a lot of inefficiencies in a lot of places. The other parts that I thought was interesting is how he defended his argument for trying to remove voting locations on education campuses, and how there's some counties or areas like Keller where the next closest voting location's like a 15-minute drive, yet there's all these ones like very close to each other in some other districts, which he finds interesting. And he's like, and if you see, it's older people who vote, so why would we not help them out more? Yet we're trying to give all these places where people aren't voting more locations. So he was just very
well, first of all, if there's a group of people that don't seem to have any issue with getting to the polling places, and they are the ones that constantly turn out, is that a reason to give them more resources to continue to be the ones that don't have any problems getting to polling places and constantly turn out?
And it's the reason why we're in the situation where we have Kay Grangers and Joe Bidens and Donald Trumps,
I mean, literally, we're just catering to one segment of people. And I think your job as an elected official should be to get more people who don't vote to vote.
Yeah. So it's like that should be the strategy. He shouldn't look at it like, oh, well, we aren't getting votes. We are not getting these young people. So yeah, you should have doubled down and tried to invest to make that happen. The one place where we both agreed with him though was he said no on building a new jail. He talked about how that would cost $1 billion, and we do not want to do that. And then he also talked about how we need a mental health center and access for our people who shouldn't be in jail. I would give him credit that was impressed on his demeanor around wanting to have a mental health facility access for it doesn't have to be in Tarrant County, but somewhere where they can take people so that they're not coming to jail just because of a mental health issue.
Yeah, they spoke about the diversion center as well, and his comment there was confusing to me because I thought the diversion center, the one that's near Southside, opened up while he has been in office, and he was basically saying that it was underutilized before he got there, and I thought it was created and started all while he was there. I think that was something that Commissioner Simmons had brought to our attention about how many of the surrounding communities were not using the diversion center as robustly as they should. And I was glad that at one point they talked about closing the diversion center and they decided not to do that. But a diversion center is a short-term solution and a mental health facility is a more long-term solution, which clearly, like you said, we agree with him that that's something that's necessary, whether that be something that JPS adds. They are adding some beds, but there needs to be more support for that so that we're not putting people who are struggling with mental health issues in jail when their problems are not solvable by a jail where they're not getting their mental health needs met.
Yes. And don't forget all the other things that this guy is doing. I mean, this guy is the reason why the Politics pod is disappointing here is it was just a puff piece allowing us to allow an extremist to look like a normal person. And if we continue to do this, then we normalize these behaviors of wasting money on election integrity unit, on canceling a Girl Inc. contract because they help LGBTQ students. Literally having quotes of saying, if they haven't called you a racist, you're not Republican enough. This is the real guy. I'm just scrolling on his Twitter right now, and the first thing's talking about how Joe Biden is the worst president in our history. Is he really? To position him and try to give him any blessing as if he's a Kay Granger is a disappointment to WFFA and the Politics podcast for trying to position someone as just some normal guy. And I mean, is he a normal guy in the sense of like, yeah, he does normal Texas stuff, and do I think he's like extremely evil? No, but do I think that what he thinks is how the world is supposed to operate and run isn't what we need in order to get to where we want to go? And so that's the part that like really drives me crazy, is that how this guy can be so extreme in one place and then just allowed to be a certain way the other, right? 19 hours ago, Biden's handlers are working down to the wire to secure his legacy as the worst president in American history. And he's like retweeting something. Right? This guy is talking about couldn't have said it better. That's his another response 22 hours away, and it's a picture of a 34-week-old baby, and it's talking about how Democrats want to kill, babies. He is fear-mongering, scaring. He's done that with TAD Appraisals District. He has all the people working for him. The only reason why he did this piece is it was 20 minutes long. He even says to the guy, the media sucks, but not you guys. Like, you guys understand. But they came all the way to him. It's just showing that, like, he plays the way he operates with the media and communication the way Putin does or Xi Jinping does. It's the same style. It's about control. It's about not hearing opposite opinions. It's not about being challenged. And so I just am very disappointed that they allowed this to go on. The part that I want to bring up to you that you showed to us and give you some space to talk about is you talked about how he's trying to get Elisa Simmons and District 2 seat to turn red and the things that he is trying to do there.
So, yeah, I saw a post on social media that had a link to the Lone Star Project article, and I think this was actually shared by Elisa Simmons, where she said that she was maybe the last person to not know that this was kind of in the works. But according to Lone Star Project, perhaps the worst political secret in Tarrant County is the intention of the mega extremist county judge Tim O'Hare to steal Commissioner Elisa Simmons's Precinct 2 seat and hand it back to former Precinct 2 Commissioner Andy Wynn, who is now serving as O'Hare's official county staff. And so I think what they're looking at possibly doing is having some kind of redistricting occurring in the interim. So typically redistricting happens every 10 years when the census happens, because districts need to be balanced and have I'm more familiar with city council districts than I am, county commissioner seats and other congressional seats and stuff like that. But they do it every 10 years, and they typically try to keep numbers of people in the districts kind of even. And one would hope that they draw lines based on, nonpartisan things. But clearly, if there's partisan people in the seats and they are trying to make sure that a seat is won by their party, they're going to do things that try to sway that district's boundaries to be more favorable. What is interesting about District 2 is it has had kind of a equal balance of being represented by Democrats and being represented by Republicans. And it has gone back and forth a couple of times, which seems to me to say it's kind of a well-balanced district where everybody gets a say. But currently it is being represented by a Democrat. And I think that this article is basically indicating that Tim O'Hare wants to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now, Andy Wynn, who was the incumbent, who was beat by a Democrat, and then that Democrat didn't run again, and another Democrat ran, and so now Elisa Simmons has been the representative. He had ran again for the seat and was beat by Elisa Simmons, and then he stopped running for elected office, went to work for Tim O'Hare, but apparently right now they're planning to have him move into another role so that he's not in Tim O'Hare's office at the time that this proposal for redistricting happens. But for me, why in the world would you try to do redistricting in the middle of a 10-year time frame of when a census just happened in 2020 and another census isn't due until 2030? If you can point to massive population shifts and changes that have made it so that maybe like Precinct 1 has, way fewer people and Precinct 2 has way too many, and you need to balance those things out. And it's, so many years until the next census. But the census does kind of keep track of those growth patterns, which is why we know now that Fort Worth has passed Austin, because we're keeping track of growth. But I think that there needs to be a very significant reason to look at redistricting an entire county in the middle. Not even in the middle. Well, I guess it is 2025. We are in the middle.
Yeah, and so this guy has bullied his way into so many things. And if you look at his past places that he was in, mismanagement, lack of funds, and city's farmers branch and other areas, because he tries to move really fast and has no patience to be critical and work with other people and hear other sides. This guy is vicious. He's vindictive. He's trying to get his agenda. And, Commissioner Simmons has been nothing but a great person keeping the county accountable. And because he now has someone who's competent, strong, and willing to not kiss the ring, he now is trying to eliminate that person. And it's just a part of the issue. Something I want to bring up to you too. He really is harped on property tax, and he talked about how Tarrant County got a designation in the state as the place that saved the state, the city that saved the most dollars on property taxes out of the state of Texas. And so he talks about how he's the leader in property tax reduction. We've talked multiple times the consequences of property tax, and only thinking about a property tax has on a growing business, which he also talks about. He's proud that he kept funding and the raises of public safety. So the only thing that's getting more dollars is public safety. But the thing that's losing is technology when we're living in an AI, hyper digital, need of digital infrastructure world.
Not to mention the region, which Tarrant County is a broader picture than just Fort Worth, needs to be looking at things like transportation, and a county participating in that would be incredibly helpful. Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that they have financially participated in that to the extent that they need to in a growing county. So there are dollar needs that are going unmet. And I think that if we're going to be honest, we need to do a thorough analysis of what is being met and what is not being met. And if your goal is to just fund public safety, then yeah, you're doing that in spades, but there are other things that are not being funded.
There was a recent comedian he's getting a lot of headwind, Ronnie Chang. It's his third stand-up on Netflix. I definitely want you to watch it. I might even, if I got time, pit the part that I want to pit in here. That I think it's so funny, and he talks about like he's a Chinese. He has Chinese descent, but he's from Malaysia. He's third generation from Malaysia, but he's a comedian and he's relatively famous now. But he talked about, he's like, man, I love MAGA, man. He's like, they're so interesting. He's like, I love America, but F US Texas. I love America, but but F US taxes. He's like, you love your mom and you like help her out. Like you love your college and you like donate to it. It's like, how do you love something and then like
refuse to fund it?
Refuse to fund it. And he's like, and it was just so good of an example of like, he's just like, don't get it. He's like, if you love something, you want to help it out, and it's and what the capitalistic culture has allowed us to do, make it normal and comfortable to pay for stuff. I don't have to worry about state funded stuff. I'll just pay the private version of the thing that allows me to get away with it. Right. So, another thing we like in America is admirals clubs and lounges. We will pay the $800 a year rather than have accountability to our airports to have high quality experiences for any average person in America. I actually, for someone who's executive platinum year over year, I last year decided to take out my admirals club because I was like, this place is more populated and like it's kind of like going back to like cities. It's like, this is like the suburban sprawl of the airport. Like I need to get back into
everybody's in here.
Yeah. And then and everybody thinks this is cool. So I'm literally the only one sitting at my gate by myself, like on my computer, and there's no one there because everyone's waiting in line to get into the Admirals Club. And it's like, it's our culture to like, oh, we're not going to fund public stuff and make our experiences better collectively, cheaper as a whole, because they know that we will punk us and we will think we just can pay for this. And then, like you said, we work forever until we're 80 because we didn't save to our retirement because we didn't want any services. So it all is connected at the end of the day.
And I don't know what they're going to do to, I guess if your goal is to have like little or no government, then sure, get rid of all of the taxes. But I just don't understand how they think these things are going to be paid for, because clearly not everyone can just throw money at a problem. Yeah. And in Texas, where they've already voted to say that you can never even consider income tax in Texas. Yeah. Let's just say never even can we talk about this thing. Yeah. I think that's part of our problem. We got to be able to talk about things and not just feel like a great fear that if you bring up an idea, it could be a crappy idea. You could determine at the end of the conversation that it's a bad idea and not go forward with it. Yeah. But to just say we can't even talk about that seems ridiculous. And in Texas, where property taxes are the bulk of what pays for all of the things that we all enjoy on a regular basis, I think that it's kind of silly to just be like, yes, I'm going to cut all that.
Well, we're going to go ahead and move into wins and losses. Wins and losses is the final piece of our episode, and we're really excited to continue to give you guys these. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share it with other people, and try to make an 817 gather. So my loss, I'm going to dive into here, is the Dallas Morning News on Sunday wrote a story talking about military radicalization on the rise. It was actually an Associated Press piece, but it was in the Dallas Sunday paper. We recently talked about, right, we had two domestic terrorism attacks right here in the United States, one in the French Quarter of New Orleans and one in Las Vegas. Both of those individuals are had some type of military background, and to me, these data points from AP News I found very interesting around the impact military service has on becoming a domestic terrorist. Since 2017, both veterans and active duty service members radicalize at a faster rate than people without military backgrounds, according to data from the Terrorism Research at the National Consortium for Study of the Terrorism and Response to Terrorism. It's called START. Is the short term at the University of Maryland. And it's important to know that like the CIA or the federal government doesn't actually have any system to track terrorism internally from their military constituents. The other piece here is that less than 1% of adult population is currently serving in the U.S. military, but active duty military members make up disproportionately 3.2% of the extremist cases. From 2017 to 2022. 230 of those arrested for the connection to January 6th had military background and experience. The AP analysis found that the plots involving people with military backgrounds were more likely to involve mass casualties, weapons trainings, or firearms plots, and included much larger, dangerous ways of doing damage. So yeah, I think more than 80% identified with a far-right anti-government ideology. And so when you look at the Department of Veteran Affairs budget, when you look at it, it has surged over the past 2 decades. All right. In the 2000s, it was 2.6% of the federal budget went to veteran affairs. In today's budget, it's 5% of the total budget. So understand that what's crazy about this is that it's 3 times the budget of the Department of Transportation, Veteran Affairs. And what's crazy about this boom is that it's 1/3 decline in the veteran population. So we have fallen in the number of veteran affairs. There was 26 million people in 2000. There's 18 million, and it has doubled in the cost to the federal budget. And so the reason why I think this is important is because everyone's talking about government efficiencies and where's all the money being spent. And what's at the same time is the people who get to act like socialists and get free health care, free pensions after 20 years in service, free education while they're in school, are the same people who will become the more likely to be extremists in our country. I'm just like, this is a sacred cow that needs to be exposed. And you can read this data points and everything I'm sharing in the show notes below.
So my loss is not quite as dramatic as all of that. And it's kind of probably just a personal thing that it drives me a little bit crazy when the Fort Worth Report goes on vacation. I feel for the reporters there, and I think that having a pause over the holidays like many people get is amazing. But every time I read an article headline and don't realize there's the little disclaimer that says that they're sharing articles throughout the year that were the popular articles, my heart jumps in my chest and I think, oh, did something happen on this topic? So I literally miss the daily coverage that the Fort Worth Report has. But, it's a win for the reporters. I'm glad they get to have a little break. And I believe that Scott Nishimura actually wrote a new piece over the break because he mentioned, who's going to talk about this? And they were like, well, go ahead, you can. And so he talked about a new grocer and restaurant experience that we're going to get to have when How Tran opens up her new facility. But anyway, that was kind of my loss, just that I was feeling like a lack of connectedness to breaking news in Fort Worth without having brand new Fort Worth Report articles on the daily.
Yeah, you can tell that they are out, which I often realize we need breaks, but it's, you just don't realize what's good until it's gone. And so that's why today's episode was a lot more about like topics and us being like questioning like approaches rather than about stories and data.
So my wins is also related to coverage and articles. many of which we didn't cover this time because, like you said, there was a lot of breaks with reporting. But there has been some excellent coverage recently and some excellent writing at both the Star-Telegram and the Fort Worth Report that has made me excited to actually be able to read through an entire article. So I think that both of those publications are doing some really excellent work on covering things and trying to stay on top of things that more people should be paying attention to, kind of hearkening back to that comment I made at the beginning of the podcast about not just reacting to the news, but giving kind of direction of what people need to be doing. And one of those things is an article that just came out in the Fort Worth Report that coming in 2025, a new way to empower Fort Worth voices and increase government transparency is going to be rolled out with an effort where folks can sign up to be a part of kind of helping the Fort Worth Report cover things by being Fort Worth Report documenters, a program that brings neighbors together to make local government more accessible and accountable. And so this is a program that's being headed up by Scott Nishimura at the Fort Worth Report. And it basically teaches people how to attend meetings and go to spaces where democracy is happening every day and not just every 4 years, but be at those meetings and make sure that they are accessible, and they often are inaccessible and hard to find and lack community voices. And these documenters are meant to change that. So they have a program where they're going to train residents to attend public meetings, take notes, and help make local government more transparent and accessible. Public meetings where very important decisions are made about your neighborhoods, your schools, your city services, but they are often not very well attended and not very well reported on. And this program will amplify community voices, shine a light on government actions, and foster civic engagement, making local democracy stronger and more inclusive. And you can sign up to be a documenter and help cover public meetings in Fort Worth and Tarrant County if you follow the links in this article that we will add to the show notes. So that can give folks something to do in the new year that is proactive and engaging and not just reactive to the news.
I love that. And the one news story that Fort Worth Report did have that I'm given as my win by Scott Nishimura is H-Mart is developing. It's in progress, and it's toward to a 2025 completion. They're talking about 80% of the leases in the area are already serviced, and they haven't even gone vertical yet. I can't wait what the impact H-Mart will have on our community. H-Mart in Carrollton is awesome. It's just diverse food, the options, how quick you can get something to go for lunch. The community of that area of Fort Worth is important. I think it also makes it competitive to recruit young generations who are interested in Asian culture. You also have to understand that the Asian population is the fastest growing population in Texas. So when you're talking about competing and finding talent who are going to work in Alliance, who are going to want to maybe take that job but need access to culture or groceries that they have alignment to, H-Mart in Fort Worth is a win. I think I'm really thrilled that this is happening. All right, beautiful people, there you have it. A long conversational show with Ann and EJ. We look forward to seeing you next time on the 817 podcast. Make sure you subscribe and share with a friend.
And hopefully I'll get back on track and remember what day of the week it is going forward and get back into the sync of life as I dip into Fort Worth.
Yeah, the new year doesn't start till tomorrow. Till today. All right. Today is happy 2025, everybody. Let's get to work.
Dopamine swipe, followers like double tap. Now they control your life, control your life.